Hello all, welcome to fifth lecture in the ServDes 25 lecture series. So today's topic is future trends in service design. And the speaker we have is Professor Daniela Sangiorgi, full Professor of Design and Head of the Master Program in Product Service System Design at Politecnico di Milano. She worked for 8 years at the Imagination Lancaster at Lancaster University. She has published seminal work in service design, contributing to the development of the field. Her research interests are in design for service innovation, with a focus on transforming the public sector and healthcare systems. Her recent research has been centered on developing a collaborative and systematic approach to designing for young people and adults' mental health and well-being. So I welcome you, Daniela. The floor is open to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll start sharing the slides. Right. So can you see?
Yes,
Can you see
yes,
the slides? Yes. Okay. Cool. So thank you so much for the invitation and the introduction. I'm Daniela Sangiorgi. So I was invited here to give a presentation on future trends in service design. And I have to say that I had a bit of difficulty in thinking about future trends. Is a bit challenging, in particular today, to think about in advance. But so I focus more about what are the themes that I'm looking at today, with some perspective in terms of where this could go. Okay, so today I decided then to focus on 3 topics that can be considered areas where there is an increasing attention today. And I have to say that the first 2 are more familiar. The third is I'm just starting to look at. So the first is the idea of strengthening the core of our human-centered design agenda. The second is the need to scale in toward the system in future-oriented perspective. And the third is the debate and embracing the debate around the modern human design approach. So the first part is somehow emerging from what we are seeing happening today, which is very astonishing, threatening, and represent threats on multiple levels, multiple aspects of everyone's lives in different ways. And the reactions to this, what is happening is, of course, the idea of retreat somehow from all this science and changing and transformations. So my reaction is actually to try to strengthen even more the core of our perspectives that somehow qualifies a human-centered design approach. And in the last months, I've been encountering increasingly some of core concepts or principles or values that somehow inform some design research and also some of our work. But my perspective is that there is this is not enough, meaning that there is a tendency to look at service design in generic terms, in terms of improving human experiences, user experience, and so on. While I think there needs to be a strengthened attention to the meaning of certain principles, the complexity of the meanings, the implications when developed into practice, the differences in application in different contexts, in different cultures, and so on. So I will go through some of these just based on some of my recent experience. So while joining, for example, a network that is this debating around dementia care, technology and design, I've been looking more closely into the concept of equity. I think equity, there is somehow an understanding that maybe is more diffuse, which is this idea of difference between equity and equality, which is well represented by the picture on the right, no? But I think that what is interesting is really to try to understand deeper the nuances of the meaning of this term. And I found it particularly interesting the idea that inequity refers to the differences that can be perceived as unnecessary and avoidable. No? And therefore, in addition, they can also be considered unfair and unjust if compared with the rest of the population. So when we think about equity-based design, is about questioning what is unnecessary and avoidable. So if we think about, for example, access to services or the impact of certain situations, service use and so on, how they can be different in different populations. So, for example, I could have an issue with my health, and it could be because I'm driving, maybe I have an accident because I'm driving too fast, or I'm smoking, or I'm not eating well, and so on. So there is the possibility something is avoidable in my behavior. But there are some other aspects, for example, that could be caused by my economic situation, or I'm living in a polluted city, or things that go beyond my possibility to intervene, let's say. So in this case, the situation that can be created is somehow beyond my choice. So equity is also associated with the possibility of choice. If people have limited or no choice in their condition of their life and work, somehow the situation can be considered as unjust. So this thinking about when we bring this principle into designing what are the possibility of choices of people, where things and situation and impact can be avoidable or not, is a fundamental thinking that could inform design in a more evolved way. And the concept of equity is inevitably connected to another concept, which is the one of justice. No? So I found this recent book by Leslie Noel that is very effective and simple in its descriptions on how to take action toward equity. And so the idea of equity is connected with justice, and she, of course, goes through different meanings of justice, social justice, racial justice, climate justice, for example. And what I found particularly interesting is how this idea of justice is associated with, for example, the idea of fair discrimination, which is a bit counterintuitive, that to be guarantee equity-based service, we need to create fair discriminations. But actually, if we think about services that we use in daily life, we can see many examples of fair discrimination. So, for example, the university fee here in Politecnico di Milano, there are different levels of payment depending on your income. So it is a discrimination in theory for people that has more income, but it's a fair discrimination because it's trying to address the people that are in greatest needs and try to level the possibility to access educational services, or all the work around gender gap in terms of payment, employment, and the policies that are trying to address this. Of course, this is experienced as a threat to dominant population, of course, and as we can see from the recent episodes around closing departments that are studying, for example, gender studies so this is all an impact, a reaction to this kind of forms of fair discrimination, but they are based on this idea of equity. So I think that this is a fundamental areas that service design should bring even more and more attention. And the idea of equity and justice, of course, is also connected with the idea of dignity of human beings. You might know the work of Miso Kim, that she would look into closely to this idea of dignity in design. And she went through different understanding of dignity. We might know more the dignity of merit, which is maybe where society acknowledge people now in different situations or moral statures. It's particularly interesting, for example, the dignity of identity. Again, talking about the field of dementia care that I've been in more somehow approaching with my research recently, is particularly challenging, in the context of dementia care, where identity is an issue and challenge to keep and maintain the identity of people with dementia. And there is also universal human dignity, that, for example, Miso Kim talked about in terms of universal rights, the idea that just being a human being deserves a treatment with dignity. Going back to these studies of Miso Kim, I was particularly interested in her interpretation of, for example, autonomy as something connected between an individual perspective and humanistic perspective. And again, related to the work done in dementia care, there was a discussion in one of the meetings of this European project, which is called HOMDEM, around autonomy, because it's one of the main principles that needs to be maintained and supported in the care for people with dementia. And when I thought about autonomy, I thought about independence, but actually autonomy is more related to the ability to make meaningful choices. So what does it mean? That I can still maintain a sense of autonomy, even if I'm dependent on services from informal carers, formal carers, or from technology. So, and therefore autonomy is not so much an individual concept, but is a relational concept that needs to consider individuals' identity, family, social networks, and also the different cultural interpretations. For example, in Western culture, we might value more independency, and while maybe in Eastern countries, in cultures, there might be more a value in terms of collective and relational dimensions of autonomy. So this just also to underline how it's important that whenever we look at these concepts, we need to consider this concept, these principles, where they are applied. So for example, in dementia care, they have different meanings in the context where they applied, but also we need to consider the plurality of cultures and the values that this concept might mean. So just going through this, I kind of saw how these principles are interconnected somehow, and how they're fundamental dimension that should inform even more and support a deeper understanding of the meaning, the complexity, the implications of the applications, again, in different contexts, different services, and different cultures. And I will present just a short project that I was involved in last year, so finished in January. Is a project funded by Politecnico di Milano. The aim was to investigate the students' housing condition, university students' housing condition in Milan, and also to co-design an intervention to address the students' housing crisis. So Milan is particularly is developing a housing crisis for multiple reasons. And university students are also affected by this crisis. This research was done with colleagues from the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies, sociologists and urban data analysts, some engineering managers of the built environments, and then as a designer, we were mostly focusing on the generative research and co-design with students. But the research was quite broad. There were interviews with students, interviews with relevant housing actors. There was a large student survey, a small survey with real estate agents, a focus group with project partners, urban mapping, a press review, and so on. Without going too much in details and the numbers that this research revealed in terms of the impact of students on the city and also off-site students, so students that come to live in Milan from outside the province or outside Italy. And the research showed, for example, that most of Polimi students rent a house in the private housing market. Only a small percentage go in public or private student housing. So it's mostly about private housing markets, which is, there is a very high demand, limited availability. So this has created an imbalance in the market that has created, for example, what we call malpractices. And malpractices are, again, motivated by this asymmetric housing market, no, that lead to contractual disadvantages for tenants. And of course, it's not just about students, but this research was specifically focusing on students. And this practice could involve financial aspects, could be about other kind of dynamics like the excessive intrusion of the landlord or impact into the tenants' personal lives. For example, there were issues emerging, like, for example, exclusion for the market on the basis of ethnicity, nationality, or gender, some power abuse during contract negotiations, a high presence of improper contracts or black market rents, and some economic retaliation and threats, such as, for example, withholding of the deposit without a valid reason. So who were the ones that are most affected by malpractices? Well, students with a low income, international students with some linguistic or cultural barriers, technical barriers, or the fact that if you come in a new city, in particular from abroad, you don't have a pre-existing social network, which is often the one that helps you find maybe some solutions, some housing solution in a more reliable way. So if we go back to our principles, somehow this research revealed equity concerns. Of course, because there is this asymmetry of power in terms of information and negotiation with landlords. And somehow that is somehow questioning how much this is avoidable. Now we are talking about how much students have a choice in this. Now, what is their actual possibility to avoid these malpractices? And we are looking again at international students, female students, or people with low incomes, and the consequences can be loss of money, psychophysical problems, delayed studies, and so on. So what we developed at the end was trying to map the university processes with the students' journeys to look at where to integrate the right information, to direct students to the right resources, enhance peer support services that were already existing in Polimi. We created an orientation platform with information on the Milanese market, something more legal, Q&A. We established a legal assistance service supported by an external association. And again, some support information. So somehow this activity, which is now a prototype, is trying to increase the agency of students, to reduce, to augment their possibility of choice, no? But it's also true that these equity concerns that impact also the right to study somehow at certain level, is depending on more systemic issues, because the housing crisis and the high prices of houses, the limited availability, and the limited control on contracts and so on, there are more systemic issues that go beyond the intervention at the individual student level or at the service level. That's why, of course, and we all know very well that another aspect where service design is working is to look at scaling our perspective, our approaches, our methodology. And here we enter into research that is trying to understand services more as complex service systems, or we saw research around value networks, or recently around service ecosystems. And these are all conceptual research that is trying to help design to understand the implication on designing for and living systems. And I joined recently some research around, for example, how do we define service system transformation? This was a particularly interesting theoretical work around, for example, service system. How do we define service system transformation? And what was interesting was that we generally focus a lot on the scope dimension, meaning how broad is the system, no? How broad is the system? We're talking about a city, or we're talking about an institution, what is the scope of change that we are looking at? But service system transformation is also about endurance. So how much the changes we're doing are lasting, are becoming institutionalized. And also about the paradigmatic radicalness. So how much we are fundamentally challenging the assumption beliefs of the existing system. So, for example, if we look at the impact of COVID on our service system, we can see that the scope of changes being massive, we know, have been global changes in some of the procedures, some of the processes, some of the technologies. But, and also the level of change in some forms was quite fundamental in some of challenging some of our maybe assumptions and beliefs. But the endurance in most of the cases was not so long, no? Because when the restriction, when the emergency reduced, then some of the practice somehow disappeared. And so when we talk about service system transformation, it's interesting that we need to consider these different dimensions. And one way that service design is trying to address this is by looking at systemic design that has been developing for some time, interest to integrate systemic thinking, understanding of complexity within design. So the systemic design is mainly looking at how to explore complex problem situations systematically and to intervene in the problem situation in an attempt to shift it into a desired direction. So what is somehow introducing systemic design in service design is this evolving vision, and also, for example, the concept of leverage points. And in a recent work with some colleagues, we tried to compare how service design, what service design should integrate when trying to develop a systemic approach.
Meeting is being recorded and summarized.
It is about trying to consider multi-level actions. There is an echo. I don't know. Close all the microphones. Thank you. So the idea of multi-levels is not something that maybe systemic design use. The idea that everything is integrated at the same level, but also the idea of understanding the concept of, for example, of emergence, and that to look into long-term visions. The concept service ecosystem design probably is the ones that more recently is going more in the direction of a systemic approach to service design. So somehow this is a reflection that is ongoing. Another way to look at systemic design is the one instead that is recognizing, for example, in the work of Jusina Vink, how systemic design is not necessarily out there, it's not about big visualization, big maps and abstract representations of systems, but it's more about the embodied and situated systemic perspective on ourselves, our bodies, our interactions, and how is fundamental to nurture what is called reflexivity, which is the awareness of the social structures that we inhabit, and which can be cultivated through the experience of unsettling situations. So it could be an individual reflexivity, it could be a collective reflexivity, which is the one that helps to recognize which are the social structures that might need to change to transform our situations. I will give an example of a research that I participated and that is still ongoing and closing this month, which is a small research funded again by Polimi and led by my colleague Beatrice Villari in collaboration with other colleagues in the department, which is called UNSEE, so it's about uncertainty in design. And it's specifically interested in investigating how service design can somehow integrate or relate with more systemic and future-oriented perspective to achieve system-level transformations. This because we can see there is already ongoing research in how to enhance the possibility to work with futures to inform our practice, but also how to develop a more systemic approach to designing, still keeping, of course, the core and the qualities of service design, which is the focus on service and service innovation. And the research has been doing literature and desk research. There has been interviews with 21 experts that are for professional or academics working on systemic or future-oriented practices. And based on these interviews and case studies, the research identified 3 main patterns for complex and uncertain transformations, and these patterns have been validated then through workshops and interviews with experts. And we have the 31st of March, that is the final event. The patterns that emerged from this research was, for example, the need to experiment with new kind of processes that go beyond linear cause-effect processes to embrace more systemic and holistic direction that builds on emergence. So again, the importance of embracing emergence in designing. Expanding the action space beyond solutionism. So the idea of, instead of thinking of single design solution, thinking about portfolios of solutions, because if you're working toward larger transformation, the approach is generally about developing different set of experiments that are aiming toward a specific change, and then extending the framing of projects beyond short terms. Again, extending the time frame of our project, considering also planetary challenges and the longer term effects the service design work might cause. So this was just one example that is trying to go toward the needs to understand how to work in toward a more systemic practice. And I will close with a few words about this other area. As I said, I don't feel much comfortable with this area because it's new for me, and it's an area that we are just trying to partly integrate within the master program I'm coordinating, and I'm also starting to look at. So there is, of course, a growing body of work in theories, methodologies, and practices to study design for design with other than human stakeholders. And this can be living forms like animal, plants, fungi, algae, intelligent systems. We saw a lot of interest debate around AI, and natural cultural heritage like rivers, mountains, buildings, and monuments. So there is research going on service research around AI-based services and AI or AI service. And this is particularly interesting because it does have an impact on what does it mean to design for service when we introduce this new kind of configurations and new kind of service encounters. Because when introduced AI agents, the service encounter is not anymore two-sided, but it's a polyadic service encounters. And understanding the implications of integrating these non-human actors and their agency in influence, informing, is a fundamental part that I think we need even more attention to service design research. The more the human design reinforces this idea that a human-centered design perspective considers technology as a design artifact, no, that stays there, stand there without influencing our actions, while more than human design perspective privilege a co-performance idea that suggests that human artificial capabilities can shape roles and social practices. And this during designing and beyond design project time. So this idea of emergence that we were talking about before is even more evident when we design for and with AI. And for this, I just started a collaboration with a colleague from Turkey, Deniz Sayar, who will be visiting Politecnico di Milan in May, to start doing a case study research on looking at how consulting firms are developing AI-based services and how this is affecting services and practice, and how they take critical design decisions around AI's unique dimension and how to integrate this into different kinds of AI-enabled solutions. So this is just started, so I don't have much to say, but I'm happy then to engage in conversation with whoever is interested in this. While on the more than human design, that includes more an ecological perspective, you know, more than human design with we were talking about with plants, with animals. I will show just a short video of a workshop that has been done in Politecnico di Milano. So Product Service System Design Master Program has in June 2 workshops that are led by international teachers. And one we dedicate to technology, so a more than human design perspective, more focusing on technology, and the other one is more focusing on the, an ecological and a life-centered perspective. So just 2 minutes of video, and then I will close.
We questioned our...
So yeah, here we go.
I see this seminar more as an opportunity for the students and participants to sense, but also experiment a different way of designing or changing the world around them. So it's more about the practicing of the tools. It's more about the sensing, and that's why I decided to run this inside the forest, the urban forest of Sangiorgi.
We questioned ourselves on the meaning of what is co-living, what is to co-live with some other entities around you, and how to find a balance.
So it's really limiting thinking about its plant as itself and with a human perspective. To really understand it, you have to discover the environment and the ecosystem that it is part of.
Perspective changing, I would say, is the most fitting word, because it's more like you used to think about sustainability, but you always think about sustainability from the perspective of the humans.
I'm pretty sure that all of us in the team would love to keep going on this project for a few weeks more and not only 5 days, because we feel really challenged by how this is really different from what we're used to, and it is really keeping our minds alive, I would say.
Sorry, 2 seconds. Trying to Okay. Right, so I put these points that I've gone through the conversation, but again, I don't think these are necessarily future trends or aspects that I'm bringing my attention to. I think that could be relevant in general in service design. Again, strengthening still core principle, we don't need to deny the human-centered perspective, but we need to go deeper and to understand the complexity of certain principles and the reflecting their implementation in different contexts, acknowledging plurality. It's about understanding how to scale our approach, but also understanding how systemic change is also somehow embodied in our own practices, in our own lives. And the idea of expanding our perspective, considering more than human perspective, the centering somehow what is a position of design and designers. So thank you very much. Last words. We have been working for some time with the colleagues, Lara Benina and Alison Prenderby, on this new handbook on service design, which has much more than what I presented. And I really hope now it's finalized and it's in a pipeline of the publisher process of production. So we hope that will be available soon. Thank you so much again for having me. I'm happy to answer questions and discuss a bit about these topics.
Thanks a lot, Daniela. That was really, really interesting. There has been a lot of interesting things that we could go ahead. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I guess we can have some questions for Daniela. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and unmute yourself. And please ask if any questions, if you have any questions.
Hi, Daniela. It's Somashri this side. So
Hi.
I am just exploring service design, and that's where my heart and mind is, and I'm looking for projects. Like, keeping that aside, I wanted to understand one thing. When we say system design and service design, how do we integrate it? Like the projects which I saw right now, it could be a portfolio or an example of system design or a service design. So what are the similarities and what are the differences?
Similarities and differences between systemic design and service design?
Yes, because the examples which I saw right now, I could find it both equivalent sitting on both the places. What makes that niche difference?
Yeah, so I mean, service design has from the start started to look at service systems, and increasingly in complex service systems. So it's not that service design is not engaging with a more systemic perspective. But the main difference is that we acknowledge when having these conversations also with colleagues, where on one side was that service design is giving a lot of focus on experience, or users, or people, or stakeholders. And systemic design is looking, for example, more attention to leverage points. So there are points in the complex systems that have a more potential by doing smaller changes to have a bigger impact. So there is this debate around what leverage points are how to identify them and how to work with them. Systemic design gives a lot more emphasis on emergence and the fact that we have also this idea that we design for services, so we don't have a full control on service, but somehow systemic design is working much more in an evolutionary perspective on supporting change. So it does allow to consider long-term interventions while service design has more short-term perspectives. Systemic design is acknowledging more longer-term perspectives and works with experiments within a wider vision that can evolve with time. That's the tendency. But of course, then there are overlaps, and we talked about a systemic approach to service design because we wanted to reflect on how to keep the two things together somehow. I hope that
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
it did. Yeah, it did. And like if I have to take up a service design project, like what should be the minimum duration?
Should be the minimum, sorry?
Yeah, like sometimes there I get some like queries asking do a service design in 3 weeks. So that's like where is the user research? We are not ideating out of the blue. So at least, like from my understanding, the research itself needs to be at least for 2 months, covering different target audience and the different areas. Then insight. So at least minimum of 6 months, what I see.
Well, I imagine that it depends on the project. So if it's, I need to improve the coffee machine service in the first floor of this department, maybe the level of complexity is limited. If I need to redesign again the housing, the support services for the housing services, student housing, no, it's a project that requires much more complexity. And then is it a consultancy project, is it a research project? So probably depends. But of course, more time it is for research than it is.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That was helpful.
Thanks a lot, Sumashri. Do you have any more questions? So I would like to read out one question, Daniela, that we have received on the chat. It's a question directed to you. Thanks for the thought-provoking lecture, Daniela. Have you ever worked on a design project that focused on enabling equity for the users? If so, would you share some of your learnings or experience?
Yes, so the project that I was presenting on student housing is an example of reflecting afterward that the results were revealing some equity concerns and then revisiting it. What we were doing was actually to increase the agency of students, to reduce the issues. But there has been also, for example, other collaborations with Canada, for example, where they were trying to understand how to develop an equity-based design approach and also to research. And that was quite challenging in terms of trying to understand who was not involved, who were excluded. Now, it was a constant questioning about who was not here, who is it, who is not involved, who is not present at the moment in this conference, and how to make the most accessible, considering different culture, different positions, different levels of ability. So. Yes, I think that it's not an easy process. It's a very complex and challenging process that demand a constant experimentation. For example, I just went last week to a conference on the Dementia Lab conference in Aveiro in Portugal, and they tried the process of involving people with dementia in reviewing the papers that were submitted to the conference. So they created a simple abstract. They try to ask reviewers to develop an accessible description of the paper in abstract, and then creating the best condition to allow also this kind of participation. And this somehow is a way to, this could be considered a traditional participatory design concern. So how can we include people when we are designing for someone, the changes that impact the life of someone? Of course, those people should be involved. But I think these are all interconnected also with equity concerns. I hope that I've been useful.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that answer. That really helps. Can I, if you don't mind, can I just ask a follow-up regarding the last question you had? So you've been talking about integrating system design and service design, right? And again, this must have its own challenge. So I just want to learn from you. Um, are there particular tools or methods that you find useful when identifying leverage points? And at what point do you find it, like, if you just take an example of one of your projects, like when in the discovery phase, did you find it useful to do like a systems map or whatever tool? Yeah.
Well, I can report what we are doing with our students, where we're trying increasingly to experiment to bring in more systemic approaches. And the main difference is that when we do understanding the context from a service design perspective, generally we look at experiences and needs of people, while from a systemic perspective, we try to look more about relations between people and existing resources, existing assets. But the relational dimension is somehow coming more to the fore because is what caused the interdependence, which is one of the qualities of complex systems, and how by understanding these interconnections is where we can actually reflect on the impact or the potential of transformation, or we can find maybe some areas where there is more collaboration or more potential for engaging increased number of stakeholders. So looking at, instead of looking at experiences, looking more at relations in system. But this is also coming from there are some articles that are reflecting on the principle of system design that can be related to service design as well.
Thanks a lot. That's a new thing I've learned. So thank you so much for that. If you don't mind me asking just one last follow-up on that.
Riddhi, I guess we allow more participants to also ask questions. We have very limited time, so yeah, it's a humble request to all of the participants as well. If you could restrict your questions to one, if possible, so that we can entertain more and more people. Okay, so any more questions? Do we have any more hands?
I have a question.
Hi, I have one question.
Sure. Ajita, can you go first?
Yeah, sure. Daniela, in your last slide about strengthening core principles, there was one principle about decentering designers. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yes, so, well, this has been, in general, reflections on service design, where we move from designers as experts, individuals, to designing as a collective practice. No? And this is also a typical shift in systemic design. So the acknowledging that systems are constantly designed by people living, inhabiting systems. And so there is an ongoing service designing that is not necessarily done by designers. And it's also from a more than human perspective or decolonizing perspective, there is this emphasis on recognizing indigenous forms of designing, and indigenous could be in different perspectives. So it was also acknowledged, for example, by the work of Sabine Junginger. She used to talk about design legacy. So when you enter an organization to work, collaborate with an organization, you need to acknowledge that there is already some design legacy, some design practices going on, which might not be similar to the design thinking a perspective approach, but there are design practices that needs to be acknowledged, and design with is more aligned with a systemic design perspective instead of a design for design of, where designers are the center somehow.
Got it. I think it's more reflecting on co-creation design methodology, something around that with your answer.
Yes, and there is also not co-creation sometimes is thought in terms of one-off interventions, like we are used to do workshops, which is 2 hours workshop, and then we go away, then 2 hours workshop, while the collective designing is more acknowledging that there is a everyday designing, no? That has a fundamental value that needs to be acknowledged in our design practice.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajita.
So, can I have one? Can I just ask one question from you?
Sure.
Basically, the question is around the service design in the branding sector. Let's say if I have a branding of for a particular, and how do you feel like the service design is more projected in a way like to emphasize the branding of that particular portion, which or the major portions what we can cover into service design for branding.
I had difficulties hearing. Maybe the connection was not great. Maybe can you
Should I
write
repeat
in
the
the
question,
chat
please?
or repeat, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to know what are the major steps which we can follow for in service design for branding.
Major steps that we can follow in service design for branding. I'm not very expert in branding. So branding, I could relate it probably to different dimensions of service design. One is, of course, all the touch points perspectives, but maybe also the value system that the service is trying to share. So there is a more strategic perspective and a more operational service design approach. So I imagine that you work on these different levels. The value is more what informs the service concept, probably. And the translation of the branding into the touch points and so on is probably a natural part of the service design process. But again, I'm not very familiar with the fields that I can to make a comparison.
All right, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Prerna. So I'd like to go with one question, Daniela. So if India, for example, is we have currently there's a lot of uncertainty that's happening. There's a lot of world structure is changing, and the demand for a service design solution has grown several times. We need very fast solutions. Now, most of these problems are very systemic in nature, as you rightly pointed out in your presentation as well. So how do you think it takes a lot of time to actually go ahead and use the methods in service design? With the need that service design has to be much more faster, how do you see it? Is there any change in the approach that we can have among service designers, or what are your perspectives on it?
Yes, there is on one side there is a reaction to this idea that everything needs to be fast, that things that are fast not necessarily have good consequences. No, we could, there is a lot of critiques around democracy that is not very quick into bringing solutions, but the alternatives that are maybe quicker are not always the best. So I'm a bit concerned about this. Of course, in terms of urgency, then the needs to address and act quickly is important, but being fast, just to per se to be fast, maybe it's not the value itself. Said this, I was having a conversation around the use of AI in service design yesterday in an interview that was part of that project. And I was, don't know if positively or negatively interested in this conversation on how the use of AI is accelerating certain processes, not in particular in research, particularly in data analysis, or in some parts of the processes there has been an acceleration in terms of interacting with the clients because they do interviews in the evening, they're already able to give some insights, and there is kind of a very quick process of interaction. So of course there are areas where certain processes can be accelerated for different ways. But yes, I think that we need to be careful on privileging being fast instead of being just, for example, or what we were talking about before.
Sure.
It all depends on the context and so on.
Thanks a lot, Daniela. Okay, so any more questions?
So, Bhaskar, I think there are a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
So meantime, yeah, Harsh, yeah, I think Harsh raised their hand. Meantime, Harsh, you can go.
Yeah. So my question is, what the method we can use to ensure the AI-driven services remain inclusive and unbiased in the service design particularly?
Big questions. As I was saying, this is an area that I'm just really entering with the this initial research. So I don't think I can be can answer in an adequate way. But of course, we all know how AI can have significant forms of biases and how use data that somehow is using that kind of biases and reinterpreting based on that kind of consequences. So I think that the attention is to increasingly develop a higher level of AI literacy in service design, to be able to question certain decisions, to be able to understand the implications better. At the moment, I don't think, at least I'm talking for ourselves, there is not enough AI literacy to be able to evaluate project directions. So that is the fundamental start. I'm talking again from a master coordination perspective, and then engage in conversation with multidisciplinary perspectives to be able to address these concerns.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Harsh. So, Daniela, we have a question on the chat. Salvi writes, hi, I wanted to understand the difference between service systems design and product service system design. I guess it's a very, would you like to take that question?
Okay, difference between service design and product service system design. Service system design, product service and system. Okay, so product service system design is a concept that I think was born related to design for sustainability. No? So the idea that if you move from producing products to creating an offering that mixes products and services in a system, you can reduce the ownership of products and support say, reduction on the impact in the environment. So all the different bike sharing, car sharing, and other kind of smart product services where technology enables you to access the products and pay per use, but not necessarily own the product, are all related to this field of study, which is product service system design. While service system design, I'm not sure what it is. So I know service design or systemic design. Service system design probably is an interpretation of designing for and within service system. So it's there is not necessarily a focus on this idea of servitization or processes and sustainability, but while the original service design is more connected to interaction design or service marketing, at least as origins, in terms of bringing design also in the design of service, where when service started to become a fundamental dimension of the economy, so the service economy and so on. So there are different origins. Yes, so the service design is following more interaction paradigm. The product service system design is following a functional paradigm, meaning that you think about products and services as functions to achieve a result. So it doesn't matter if I use a car or I take a taxi, I'm still going from A to B. So if I think in terms of functions, my possibility to design expand because I can reach my goal in different ways. No, so that's the kind of differences I can think about at the moment.
Thanks, Daniela. We have another question by Francisco. He asks, can you talk a bit about the cultural sensitivity needed for designers to design services that are meaningful and relevant to the socio-cultural context in which such services are implemented?
Yes, so this is a big issue, even if you just go in another area of the city. So we started a research now on the understanding outreach strategies for young people in a need situation, meaning not in employment, education or training. So we started a project about this in a specific neighborhood in Milan. So, which has particular situation with a lot of migrants and there are a lot of being interventions and so on. So even just entering a neighborhood in the same city that you live has issues about cultural sensitivity, how you approach those contexts. And the way that we try to do is to engage, of course, local associations that are working for many years in the context. We are creating a youth advisory group from young people from the neighborhoods that can inform and follow the process and can help to co-evaluate the process. So, and then so the aim is to support the local association, not substitute them, and learn from them. So I think that's it's always about, when we are talking about designing as a collective practice, is really about understanding there is a lot of designing going on already in this area of Milano, and we are just trying to support maybe access to knowledge around outreach strategies from different practices, international practices, and then discuss with the local community, with the local association, with young people, which strategy could be more relevant for the specificity of the context. I don't know, Francesco, if I have been useful.
Okay. We'll move on to the next question, perhaps. So Masasi asks, how does AI impact the scalability of services?
How? What is it?
How does AI impact the scalability of services?
Impact scalability of services. Again, I'm I'm not an expert in AI. I'm just starting to. I think what was not just about the scalability, but what I was interested in learning about AI was this idea that that the main issue is about defining a logic, and then there is this potential for AI to become even increasingly more independent. No? I don't know if that is somehow an issue on scalability, but it's surely more than scalability. I think there is an issue on how much you release control, how much you how do you negotiate the agency between AI and human, how that can have, of course, a potential for maybe the scalability or in that case. Um, yeah, so I'm not there yet to be able to answer this question. I'm sorry, but again, as I said, I mentioned as a future trends, also in my research, as a future trends, not present trends.
Hi again. Thanks. I'm really enjoying the session. Are there any more systems thinking tools or resources that you could recommend, like a book that you really like, or articles?
I see that Laura posted the new book by Marie Suoleimo. It is actually a novel book on a systemic, more systemic design.
Okay, yeah, that I'll check. That's really amazing. So thanks a lot for that, Laura, again.
Yes, I personally love the work by Mike. Hold on that I put the name in the chat. She has been working quite a bit on systemic design, but trying also to bridge with service design. I think that her work has been particularly inspiring in that sense. There is also another person that we collaborated with, who is Jenny Winhall, that has been working on system change from a multidisciplinary perspective. So her work is not just focusing on design, but on multiple disciplines. They did this festival on system change or something like that. Very, very interesting. So I think you can find quite a lot of interesting insights here. So it's the system shift initiative.
Okay. So one last question, Daniela. I have a question. So when we are talking about, you really mentioned quite nicely about that the playground of service design is ever increasing. We are slowly and taking more complex problems to handle. So you mentioned about life-centered design and how we are going beyond human beings. So how do you see the future? So is it too many stakeholders is anyway making the system more and more complex? So how do you see it? What is the future that you see that service design could do?
Yeah, so life-centered design again, I think as I show in with the short video, I think the first thing is about the change of perspective really, and an understanding in different contexts, what does it mean to take the perspective of different kind of life forms. So probably again, it's about multidisciplinarity also in this case, to be able to fully acknowledge the needs or the impact on certain living forms, but also is about understanding the different forms of coexistence. So how can we coexist? I don't know, for example, in Italy, there has been a big debate around wolves to be reintroduced in certain mountain areas, and wolves, but also bears. And how, with all the risk and the fear of the population, but then how can you create a situation where you actually can coexist? So I think it's about changing the paradigm, changing the perspectives, and therefore redesign our approaches starting from this wider perspectives. And there is already quite a bit of work going on in this area. On more the human design, life-centered design. So again, like we are doing with systemic design, we can have a look on what is going on and see how much can we integrate within our practices.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Daniela.
There is one question by Francisco. So he has reposted it. I think we missed in our previous discussion. So can you please talk a bit about evaluating the social, cultural, economic, and environmental impacts of service design and service innovation?
Okay, an easy question for the last 5 minutes. Yes, so also impact is another area that we're starting to bring attention toward also in our master program. And there is a group of colleagues in a department of architectural studies. No, they are in engineering. They are looking into how to measure social impact. And the way is of complex interventions was, of course, to identify create the theory of change and then identify different APIs that can be, we can use to reflect on different levels of impact. Maybe establishing the KPI in a collective and collaborative way, now, because the more the interventions are complex, the more the designing also the evaluation strategy should be a collective effort, no? Because different stakeholders might have different interests, there might be different needs, and so also the evaluation approach and focus needs to be equitable in terms of acknowledging diverse needs, diverse voices, and therefore then define a plan. And of course, evaluating impact has different time frames, and therefore it's very challenging for service design that maybe have shorter time interventions or are paid maybe for shorter time intervention than to measure and to keep perspective on that more longer term is an issue. So yes, so we need to learn more about social impact and integrating that perspectives as well to be more aware of the potential consequences.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniela. I'm sure that was a very tough question, but yes, you answered it very nicely. So thank you for your time, and we are ever thankful that you could grace us today. And we had a lovely interaction from everyone. We had some good questions, and we got to know a lot of things. Our service design is ever growing, and even the pedagogy is developing every day. And there are a lot of new things where you have discussed about how the vocabulary is changing. You have also talked about the housing problem. You have how the systemic issues get highlighted while actually doing a service design problem. And you have also mentioned and beautifully highlighted the need of AI and what more can be done. It's a research area that's further to be established, and more research has to come in how AI can actually help service design. And lastly, I found it to be very interesting where you actually talked about the plant's perspective and designing from perspective of non-human beings, which is very, very interesting and quite new. And thanks a lot, Daniela. It has been lovely to have you. And
so we look forward for the next presentation by Ravi.
Yes. So this makes me call out for please to all the participants, do join us for the next talk by Ravi Mahamuni. It's on April 18th, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. IST. Do register yourselves and join us. And I hope we don't need to remind you, but still do register for the main conference, which is due on 6th to 8th of October 2025. Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, thanks a lot, Daniela. It was really wonderful. I'm looking forward to meet you at conference.
Yes. Thank you, Kane. Bye, everyone.
Hope to see everyone.